Hello everyone and welcome to our video series Sala aula Digital. Today we'll be learning British history for intermediate students. Who are the British? Part 6, the Stuarts. Don't forget to subscribe the channel and like the page. If you want private lessons, please contact the email saladialadigital2020@gmail.com. Shall we begin? This lesson covers a period of over 100 years, during which time there was a struggle between Parliament and the Stuart rulers. If you remember from the last video, the Tudors, Queen Elizabeth died, and she died without any children. So James VI of Scotland became King James I of England. James was clever, but he was not popular. During his reign, two problems arose: the power of Parliament and problems of religion. James believed that he was king by God's will. He refused any Parliament's opposition. And when the members of Parliament refused to vote him and give him more money, he dismissed the Parliament. So he began to raise money otherwise, by selling land and titles to his friends. At the same time, he ordered scholars to prepare new translation of the Bible to be sold. The King James Bible was produced in 1611, and it was not changed for 300 years and can still be bought today. So James I ordered all Catholic priests to leave the country, as he was Protestant. He didn't allow Catholics to worship as they pleased. So, of course, the Catholic nobles were so angry that they plotted to blow up the Parliament. As you celebrate in your English classes, Guy Fawkes was arrested. He was a Catholic soldier, and in the early hours of 5th November 1605, he was arrested under the House of Lords. And this was called the Gunpowder Plot. Guy Fawkes had built a tunnel from his house to the Parliament. He had 6 barrels of gunpowder under a pile of wood in the cellar, and he was found carrying matches. And what happened? He was arrested, along with several other plotters. And they were all hung, drawn, or quartered. Like the Catholics, the Puritans were not allowed to worship as they wished either. That's why they decided to sail across the Atlantic. 100 men, women, and children set out in a ship called Mayflower, the first ship to go to America. After a stormy voyage lasting 60 days, they landed in America. They were called the Pilgrim Fathers, or the Pilgrims. So the Pilgrim Fathers, or the Pilgrims, called their home New Plymouth when they arrived. And American Indians taught them about local plants and seeds in America. In 1625, James died, and his son Charles I became king. And the Parliament tried to control his power by not giving the money he wanted. And so, Charles decided to rule without the Parliament. His new taxes made him unpopular, though. And also, people feared that he could bring the Roman Catholic religion again, because he had promised so to his French wife, Henrietta Maria. But Charles needed money to fight a war against the Scots, so he recalled the Parliament again. But John Pym began to pass laws to control the king. John Pym was the leader of the members of Parliament. But Charles didn't want that, so he took an armed guard to Parliament to arrest 5 of the leading members and declared war on the parliamentarians. And that's how the Civil War had begun in England. And at that time, people had to choose sides. And the parliamentarians were defeated. And after several defeats, they appointed a brilliant army captain, Oliver Cromwell, to train his soldiers. And Oliver Cromwell created a new model army and defeated the king's army at the Battle of Naseby. But after losing the key towns of Bristol and Oxford, Charles surrendered. In 1648, he escaped from London. Nevertheless, he tried to restart the war later on. But he was arrested and put on trial for treason. Throughout his trial, Charles behaved with great dignity, according to historians. He was called a tyrant, a traitor, and a murderer. He was sentenced to death. And on that day, it was a freezing day of January, when Charles went to the scaffold. And he wore an extra shirt so he would not shiver and seem afraid. After making a short speech, he put his head on the block, and the executioner's axe came down, and a loud groan was heard from the crowd. So it was the beginning of democracy. The triumph of Parliament in the Civil War laid the foundations of a parliamentary system of government, which is a model for other countries. One curious fact of the time is that people believed that witches were working with the devil. And people were so afraid of being accused of witchcraft, especially old women. And many innocent people were hanged for the sake of this terrible superstition. Especially people with pets, who were constantly suspected because witches were thought to keep their own evil spirit in an animal. And people were hanged or burnt. So after the execution of the king, Britain became a republic called the Commonwealth, ruled by Cromwell and the Parliament. As the Parliament did not agree with new elections, Cromwell, backed by the army, dismissed the members of Parliament and ruled as Lord Protector of England. Under the Commonwealth, life was shaped by the Puritans, and Christmas was forbidden, theatres and inns were closed, and it was forbidden to play cards, to dance, or playing football. When Cromwell died, his son Richard Cromwell took over the power and became Lord Protector as his father. But the army disliked him, and he soon retired. And that's when Charles I's son was called from abroad to become the new king, Charles II. Charles II spent a lot of money. in magnificent balls and banquets he held. He loved dancing and the theatre, and he was always short of money because of that. So since the Parliament did not grant him taxes or give him money, he had to turn to the French king, Louis XIV, for money. But, yes, he was given money, but in return, he promised to bring back the Roman Catholic Church to Britain. And in the summer of 1665, unusually hot summer, a terrible plague struck again like the Black Death in 1348. People lived in very poor conditions, and 68,000 people died with this plague. This plague was also carried by fleas that lived on rats. And after the Great Plague, England was the stage of the Great Fire in 1666, a fire that broke down in a baker's shop. The wind was so strong that the flames spread quickly through the narrow streets of wooden houses. It was only on the fifth day that the flames were under control, and London was left a smoking ruin. So much of London had been destroyed by the Great Fire that the king called an architect, Christopher Wren, to design a new city. Wren made sure that all the houses and buildings in the city were built of stone or brick, and that roads were made wider. So he rebuilt the whole city. His masterpiece is considered St. Paul's Cathedral. And Charles II died, and his brother succeeded him and became King James II. He was a Catholic and soon began to put Catholics in a position of power. Nevertheless, the Protestants felt very uncomfortable with that, and there was a Protestant rebellion led by the Duke of Monmouth. The Protestants were defeated in the Battle of Sedgemoor in 1685, and the king condemned 200 to be hanged and 800 to be sold as slaves. So the leader of the Protestants was executed, the Duke of Monmouth. And James was defeated by his own daughter, Mary, who landed at Torbay to fight against Catholics, attacking them. Mary was married with William, the Dutch Protestant leader, and James, her father, fled to France, and Parliament offered the throne to Mary and William. James was very keen on science, and Roger Bacon, a very important scientist at the time, began to carry out scientific experiments to discover more about the world. His ideas were continued throughout Stuart times, and more was known about the human body, nature, and the planets. By that time, Isaac Newton discovered the law of gravity by watching an apple falling from a tree. During Charles II's reign, he was also very interested in science, and so he founded a club called the Royal Society, where doctors, scientists, and astronomers could discuss their work. Throughout the Stuart period, the eastern coast of America was settled by the British, and the early pioneers set up colonies which prospered through fishing, fur trapping, and tobacco growing. And the British ships traded all over the world. In England, many people still worked on the land in Stuart times, but industry became more important. Here you have a picture of the first factory in London. And the fastest growing industry was in fact coal. Coal was carried by sea from Newcastle to heat homes in London. But other industries were relevant, namely the iron industry, glass making, and salt mining were also important. And ships were built in Newcastle and Bristol that carried the goods overseas. So when Mary and William came to the throne in 1689, Parliament set up a list of rules to control them. They were called the Bill of Rights. At last, the Parliament was more powerful than the king. When William died in 1702, James II's other daughter, Anne, became queen. Scotland was united at that time. Now people talked about the two countries as Great Britain. But the members of Parliament began to divide into two parties, the Whigs and the Tories. So we were in the 17th century, and Queen Anne was the last of the Stuarts. She had 16 children, but they all died. And she also died in 1714, and the Parliament decided to offer the throne to a Protestant German, Prince George, who was the great-grandson of James I. And that's how the new Georgian age was about to begin, with King George. Thank you. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, please share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe the channel. If you want private lessons, please send an email. Bye bye.